the Tech Interactive, working on creating relevant exhibitions for our community. I'd like to thank the audience for tuning into the Tech Interactive's discussion on harnessing your untapped potential. We have a great conversation planned this afternoon. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. I want to let the audience know that this talk is being recorded, and we would love to have the audience engage with us, and as questions come up, please add them to the chat and we will address them in the Q&A. And just to test this function out, I'm going to ask a question of the audience. What temperature do you like your water? Our panelist, Robin, likes his water room temperature, so I'm curious what everybody else thinks. And while you are kind of figuring that out, I'll continue. I want to thank all of you, thank the supporters of the Tech Interactive. Our mission at the Tech Interactive is to inspire the innovator in everyone. We envision our future as developing problem solvers locally, nationally, and globally, and problem solvers that will make the world better. We have an amazing guest for our conversation on harnessing your untapped potential, Robin López. Robin grew up locally, just up the road from us in Richmond. He received his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from San Francisco State University and did his graduate work at San Jose State University in water resources management. Presently, he is working on his PhD at Berkeley in environmental science, policy, and management. He has received several notable national awards and scholarships. And in addition, Robin still finds time while being so busy to mentor and help youth actualize their potential. Welcome, Robin. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. I'm going to look upon our conversation this afternoon as a mentoring session for the audience and for myself, frankly. And I just want to say, Robin, you and I have had the opportunity to speak several times. We've gotten to know each other a little during our work that we did on an upcoming exhibition at the Tech Interactive called Solve for Earth. You were featured for your permafrost research in the exhibition, which is, it's a fantastic thing. But I would like for all of us listening into this conversation, can you tell us more about yourself? I'm going to just hand the reins over to you right now.
Yes, most definitely. And what I'm going to do right now is share my screen. I have a slide deck prepped here. Actually, it looked like I'm not able to share the screen at this moment. There we go. Perfect. Just gonna. All right, so first and foremost, before I get into anything about myself or anything that's going on with what I do and how I do it, I do want to set this moment aside for land acknowledgement of the Ohlone people in the Ohlone land. So before we move forth and talking about anything, we need to take this moment to recognize the space that we currently occupy at the Ohlone land. And I want us to all think critically about not just how we enjoy this environment and the privileges of doing that, but also critically thinking about how we can decolonize these spaces. Now, moving really quickly into my own personal background, as you heard briefly from Michelle, I'm a local product. I was born in Oakland, raised in Richmond, and to be quite upfront, honest, and transparent about myself, I actually barely graduated high school. But I did dabble in music as a youth, and that kept me relatively occupied aside from different side hustles that I had going on back then. And unfortunately, due to the lack of guidance and mentorship at a young age, when I tried to go to college, I ended up dropping out several times. And going down this brief little list, I had to switch my hustle eventually. And that was unfortunately after several traumatic events of friends being murdered, incarcerated, and the unfortunate passing of my best friend who had died by suicide. And that's when I was confronted with the need for change. And unfortunately for me, it took these series of traumatic events for me to recognize and understand that that was my catalyst for change, and that's not what I want for rising youth or the rising generation to have to endure something traumatic in order to find their catalyst for change. Flash forward now, I'm your favorite scientist from the hood. I'm at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where I've been since 2012. As you heard, I'm also a PhD student at UC Berkeley. And a quick fun fact, I also recently applied to be an astronaut for NASA. Don't know what my chances are, but I think that's pretty dope to say, like someone from the hood was able to apply to be an astronaut. But oftentimes, unfortunately, people would see me, or society often sees people like myself and similar individuals as glitches in the system or anomalies because they don't see people like us often. And what I'm sharing right now on the screen is National Science Foundation data from 2015 on both gender and racial representation within the scientists and engineering occupations in the United States. And you can see quite clearly the gender and racial disparities are huge. And that's not to say we're not interested in science or that we're not good enough or that we're inadequate, but this speaks volume to the issues that keep plaguing us with respect to institutional racism, structural racism, and so forth. And fortunately for me, what these next couple slides are gonna dabble in a bit is a bit of intersectionality, which I will try my best to explain to the audience. But a lot of my ability to keep my head afloat was finding that confidence and finding my own identity. And much of that was through mechanism of art. For me, that's music and photography. But I'm gonna speak more prominently to music because similar to math, music is a universal language. It's something that needs no words. We move, we interact, we communicate, and we feel a variety of emotion through this universal language. Through these true forms of intersectionality between cultures and experience, that we're able to find our voice, our identity, and that confidence. And that, I think, segues really importantly into this idea of mentorship, and that it is equally important in finding that voice and finding that much needed confidence in order to actualize our potential, to harness that untapped potential that we often speak about. Because art forms can only take me and other people so far in knowing ourselves and knowing our identity, but it's that mentorship that really pushes us to move those boundaries. And for me, I'll tell anyone any time of the day, I didn't become a scientist overnight. It was a process, and it required failures and guidance that I was fortunate to have through mentorship. And this picture that's on the slide, it speaks to that entirely. That photo, there's a funny story behind it, and I own up to it every single day. Behind me in that photo is a picture of a steel bridge for a senior design project. And in that senior design project, I think I lost myself there. Michelle, can you still see my screen there?
I can see you, Robin. I can't see your slide deck. So I'm wondering if you can restart your slide deck.
Yeah, it looks like it got, looked like the share feature got stopped. There we go. Everyone able to see that now?
I can see, yes.
Perfect, okay. So I think you may have missed the last slide about music as universal language. I hope everyone caught what I said, but I think the picture also speaks to what I was saying. But jumping right back forward to highlighting that mentorship was equally important and finding that voice and that much needed confidence that we could find through art form. I was rambling on about a photo that you now can finally see. That's a picture of my baby face from several years ago. That pre-quarantine face, pre-quarantine features. This was back in 2015 when I graduated from SF State, and we had to do a senior design project to build a bridge. And our bridge failed. We were a hardworking team. We went through all the calculation, double, triple check, We made the bridge, we went to competition, and when they put weight on the bridge, it completely collapsed. We all were heartbroken about it. And at the same time, we learned in that moment that this was part of the process. Failure was part of the process. And for me, I learned very two valuable lessons in that moment. That, as I keep reiterating, failure is part of the process, and we need to claim it and own it. But also, if my name's on a bridge, don't go on it. It's not safe. But through learning about failure and accepting them, and through effective mentorship, that I'm able to find ways to still interact with my friends, their kids, and the broader community. So I may have ascended and different life paths that are different from my friends, but I'm still able to stay connected. And this has allowed me to get into creative ways to share science, visually, musically, through other different forms of art, and which has allowed me to then communicate to local youth, expose them to our nature and our ecology, allow them to see the same beauty that I see through various lenses. And in doing so,
Robin, quick, I don't think your slides are moving forward.
are you seeing?
I'm seeing you in the bridge.
Oh, interesting. Is it still on the bridge?
Yeah, it's still on the bridge, but just wanted to let you know that you can keep talking though.
Okay, I'm sorry folks, we're having technical difficulties. Let me stop sharing and reshare. Maybe that will, there we go. Able to see three different,
Yes.
perfect. So yeah, like I was saying, tapping into the creative modes, allowing me to share that with local youth about the beauty of nature and ecology, but continually allowing myself to share science while still empowering my own voice and my own identity, plus that of others. But it's not always linear or that straightforward. And just because I'm in a position where I'm at now doesn't mean that I don't have my own challenges. And that gets me thinking a lot about my place in academia and the scientific enterprise. How do I survive and how can I be heard? There's constantly this questioning of my own presence. Did I earn my spot? What we like to call or refer to as imposter syndrome. Do I belong here? Is this even my voice? And again, to reiterate and double down, like this is why mentorship and guidance is important, because they help us understand that entering privileged spaces intentionally not designed for Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, women, LGBTQIA+, or other marginalized identities, it's not easy. It requires a lot of resiliency and advocacy and allyship, not solely from us. That shouldn't be solely at the labor and expense of our time. And again, this is why I cannot express enough why mentorship is important, finding those right mentors, and those who are in mentoring capacity, acting on that, acting in forms of allyship and advocacy, championing for your mentees. So it goes without saying that by having that privilege of great mentors, it's allowed me to learn what it means to be an actual scientist through my own voice and my own identity. That it's more than just research in the lab. It's influencing and guiding policies, being an advocate, being that champion for change, working towards anti-oppression and anti-racism in response to past failures in science itself. And also inspiring curiosity and creativity. For me, that is the foundational sense of what it means to be a scientist. And so that being said, I consider everyone a scientist, whether we're credentialed and have degrees or non-credentialed and don't have degrees. And through my experience of doing field work and working with a lot of different stakeholders in my career so far, I've learned the best scientists are the ones who don't have degrees. So never dismiss what you have to bring to the table, even if you haven't started an academic journey. But if you think it's cool to save the world while playing with soils and taking pictures of rocks all day and taking selfies, then maybe you're the next great scientist that we greatly need. Enjoy that brief selfie. But also being a scientist also means unique opportunities. Opportunity to not just travel and explore isolated spaces, but be a part of an amazing group, or randomly end up on Netflix by accident with, maybe some of you may or may not know this older gentleman, Bill Nye the Science Guy. But yeah, things like that happen. It's pretty dope. And these unique opportunities intersected with voice identity and the idea of harnessing that untapped potential plus mentorship, it can lead to major accomplishment. And us understanding that science doesn't have borders, or theoretically shouldn't have borders. And for me, that means having that ability to pursue my best accomplishment, which is continually advocating for justice, access, equity, diversity, literacy, funding, evidence-based policy through the lens of science. And in an effort to wrap it up, because I know slightly went over my time frame right here, but I just wanted to really quickly point out why I intentionally chose these 3 photos that are on the screen. That first photo, we need more Bay Area kids dropping science. Not literally dropping science and leaving it, but like dropping that knowledge, dropping what we know. Like, you know, that's a play on the vernacular that's pretty common with a lot of us out here in the Bay Area. We need more Bay Area kids dropping science and dropping their insights on us. You have a lot to bring to the table, bring it. That middle picture, it may be hard for some of you to read through, but I'll read it out really quickly. It's from a good friend of mine named Robin López. So now you want diversity and inclusion. What about equity and justice? And that's something that throughout the years is constantly missing through science, and we need to do better. And that last photo is the most important photo to me. That's a young kid named Jesse who I have the privilege of mentoring. And we asked, what do you want to put on your sign? He drew a little rocket and he said, I want to be an aerospace engineer. Clearly that's not his handwriting. Someone wrote that for him, but it speaks volume to everything that I've been talking about. Harnessing that potential, mentorship, identity, and voice. We need to be able to bring that to the table for kids like Jesse so that he can become that aerospace engineer that he wants to be. And I'm going to leave that last thought there, but close it out with this, this last phrase that I heard from a good friend named Beto Vasquez from UC San Diego, to remember that it's your story. Don't let someone else write the pages for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and pass it right back to Michelle. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. That was absolutely awesome. And I just want to thank you for acknowledging the indigenous peoples that were here before us and whose land upon which the Tech Interactive sits. So I really want to thank you. That's a good way to start this kind of conversation. So let's dig into what you were talking about. So I really want to talk about finding your potential, finding your voice. So everybody, we all grow up with outside opinions of who we should be and what we should be doing. One thing that you talked a lot about in your comments was music. I wanted to find out if you could please share with us, share with the audience about how music figured into you developing your voice. And also, in addition to that, if you could maybe share some tips with the folks in our audience about listening to your inner voice.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. I love that you asked that question. I love when people ask about music and science because the connection is not always so explicit. Foundationally, though, music for me has allowed me to find my voice and my identity because it has been that one space where I'm in my own world, where I could write and express the feeling that I have internalized and put them out there. And it's allowed me to see my growth over the years too. Like to this day, I still try to find time to write. And I think at this point I have nearly like 10 notebooks full of writings and different lyrics, poems, all sorts of ideas and thoughts that I've expressed out there. And it's allowed me to see my growth, but also allowed me to see what the common themes are that I'm passionate about. What are the things that I keep circling back to? And, and making that connection to science and, how could we leverage that? I have used music as a way to connect with youth that identify with the hip hop culture by successfully producing a couple hip hop tracks centered around geoscience and climate change. Using that as a way to use music, that language of that universal language of music as leverage to expose students to something they otherwise wouldn't be exposed to in the classroom.
Great. That's fascinating. So what I'm hearing is I love this fact that you have 10 notebooks of writing. And I love that idea that you have a history of finding your own voice, finding your potential, and that you're seeing your own growth. Like being able to be introspective is really a real gift. And that's interesting to think about as we're all trying to learn how we listen to our own voice. Now, the other thing I kind of wanted to address is that when you started to listen to your own voice and you started to unlock your potential, and I think this is the case with everyone, as we start to unlock our potential, and when you start upon your journey, every journey has obstacles and failures, and you alluded to that with the bridge project that you worked on when you were at SF State. Can you speak to us, the audience, on how failure helped build your resiliency?
So yes, like, as I explicitly mentioned in the short presentation, failure is part of the process. And I don't think we normalize that conversation enough, not just in the sciences, but all professional endeavors, that we do encounter failure. No one's journey is perfect. And unfortunately, that's an issue within academia in particular. We produce this image that those who have ascended to these very top-tiered credentialed position never endured failure, or never had any issues in which they were held back, when that is just categorically false. We have all encountered that. And so, the reason it being that it's important to acknowledge that, to take ownership of it, and really be transparent about it, is that it allows other people who are in rising generation to understand that they don't need to be perfect. You don't need straight A's. You don't need to have 4 publications by the time you apply to grad school, and so on and so forth. And those are specific examples to issues within academia, but I mean, issues of failures even within relationships. You don't need to have that perfect 5-year relationship with a significant other in order to be able to say how to be a perfect partner. Like, we learn from our mistakes, we learn how to grow from that, and we develop maturity.
Yeah.
For me, you and this kind of intersects with the last question about finding voice. You realize your voice and your identity could be fluid. Things do change over time, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Well, encapsulating all that you said, I think that we should all look upon ourselves as works in progress,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that nobody is perfect. We're all gonna, we're all gonna fail, and we should learn from those failures, pick ourselves up, and keep moving forward. So that's a huge thing that we all have to, we all have to be gentle and kind to ourselves in that way. So in your intro comments, you also acknowledged that no dream is accomplished alone,
Mm-hmm.
that finding the right mentors is very important. Can you dig in further with us and share with the audience how you found your mentors, how they helped you, and how we can find our own mentors?
Yes. So earlier in the beginning of the presentation, I've mentioned that I dropped out of college the first several times. And that was largely because I had no sense of navigation, didn't have the right mentors in place, and largely because I didn't know where to look. Likewise, those potential mentors didn't know where to find me either. So it's somewhat of a two-way street, but it shouldn't be the mentee traveling the most down that street in order to make the relationship happen. But specifically within the scope of like academic journey, whether it's in college or high school, the best way to find that mentor who's going to champion for you and be your advocate is by joining the clubs that are on your campus that center around the things that you're passionate about, whether it's environmental justice or LGBTQ rights, person of color centering identities, racial justice, and so forth. Typically, all those clubs have to have some faculty, teacher, advisor leading that club. And more often than not, that faculty advisor strongly believes in those things that you believe in too. And that's where you can start developing that connection. You start talking with that person, having informal meetings, and then seeing where it grows from there, asking if they have connection to people with similar interests and similar or internship opportunities and the things that you're passionate about. And it grows organically from there. And that's how I've learned to find my best mentors. It hasn't necessarily been through any type of formal mentoring program. It's more so just been through interacting with clubs and organizations on campus.
Yeah. And I just want to focus in on a word that you said. It's the connections part of it. I know that I try to stay away from the word networking because it's a little transactional, but it's that connection and finding people who are going to be on your side and helping you, and also when you've made a little bit of a misstep, kind of being really guiding you around that. So yeah, that's an important thing, finding the right mentors and just based on what you've accomplished in your lifetime, I think that you've found some really great mentors. So I wanted to also talk about the role of scientists, because something that you said earlier and you showed in your slides is that science is, and being a scientist is beyond just doing experiments. I want you to discuss the role of scientists and engineers in speaking to their truths, speaking to their beliefs, and shaping policy. That actually is something that I admire tremendously about you. There are I don't want to go, you're an incredible person, but I just find it so admirable that you stand up for your beliefs. Can you speak to that and why that's important?
Yeah, so the reason, and this ties into why I shared that third slide on representation and gender and racial disparity. Using your experiences helps inform better policy. Having diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences help bring more dialogue to the table. And that is critically and fundamentally important if we want to inch closer toward having a more just, equitable, and inclusive society. And people will be quick to say, well, that's a very idealistic way to think of the world around us, but it's not. It's not a radical idea to say, hey, maybe we should get people from all different forms of identities and intersecting identities at the table, and not just a place at the table, but an actual spot to speak. And that speaks to itself to a whole nother tangential issue where we'll be allowed to enter what's called the white ivory tower, but we're not allowed to touch things. So, to that end, that's why it's important to be vocal, at least for me. I do not shy away from expressing my opinion. Anyone who's friends with me on Facebook, they see that, they know that, and they know if I'm teeing off on my Facebook status that I'm in my feelings about something and I'm very passionate about it. But to that end, it is very important to not only tap into that voice, but tying into all those things we had mentioned, harnessing the potential, mentorship. If you're a mentor and you see that someone or several identities are not being represented at a decision-making table, you have a responsibility to do something about that. So that's why I said earlier, it shouldn't be the mentee traveling down the road the furthest. The mentor has a lot of responsibility and accountability in that relationship.
Great, wonderful. Now, we have a little bit of time before, I really think that there are going to be a ton of questions, and I want to ask one quick question before we open it up to Q&A. I'm wondering we have budding scientists in our audience, and a very diverse audience. And could you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work within a research setting?
It is so cool. Well, at least for my experience, and I say that wholeheartedly, acknowledging that I have had a very privileged experience in science. And I'm not going to say it's been perfect or I haven't encountered issues of bias or racial discrimination. That does happen, unfortunately. But overall, it's been so cool. Like I had mentioned in one of my last slides about unique opportunities. Being able to go a mile deep underground and take pictures of rocks. Like who gets to do that? Going up to Alaska to share my research. And you've seen that interesting slide with Bill Nye. maybe people might have questions about later, but it has led to very interesting moments like that I never thought in my wildest dreams would ever happen. Um, Without disclosing my age, because I do feel a little bit old whenever I mention it, but I would say 10 or 15 years ago, I never thought I'd be in this position to even be able to share this kind of insight or even say that I'm a scientist. I was most definitely sure that I'd be dead by the time I was 21. So
Mm.
to be here now and be able to share that, for me, that's already cool in itself, to just be alive and just be here to be able to do science and have the mentors in place who allow me to do science, but also allow me to share science through a social lens. So for any of those budding scientists who are out there thinking about it, or really feel like they're a scientist but not sure like how to really tap into that, move how you feel. Like, move unapologetically. If people can't accept you for who you are and what you represent, it's their loss.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin. We have a bunch of questions. So the first question that I have, and I think this is a good one, how do I know when I have enough mentors?
You never have enough mentors. You may have too many people saying things in your ears, but you never have too many mentors. Rightfully so. When you have a lot of people in your camp, people are going to have different opinions, but that's why I say you never have too many mentors, because when you're able to pull from different experiences, it allows you to make a better informed decision. Like, for instance, when I was making my decision to pursue my PhD, I got admitted to several top universities, but my number one choice, and I'm going to be very frank about it, my number one choice was not UC Berkeley. And I had to make a really tough decision about that, and had to pull from various mentors, formal and informal mentors. And it ended up being the advice of a Black astrophysicist who had the nickname of the gangster physicist, Hakeem Oluseyi. He put it, quite concisely to me for this is the decision I should make. And I consider that a very private conversation, so I'm not going to share the extent of it, but it allowed me to make a better informed decision about what I want for myself and what I'm going to need to do in the future in order to accomplish that. So that just speaks to one example of why it's important to have as many mentors as you can bring to the table.
Okay, because they help you make better and more informed decisions. Got it. That's great. Second question here is, how do we encourage citizen scientists, public participation in scientific research at the middle and high school levels? Are there programs that people can look for? I think that you will have a lot to say about this one.
So there's definitely many programs out there, but I think one of the first ways to make this a cornerstone within middle school and high school academic is to stray away from the terminology citizen science, and instead replace, and this is something I've also been recently learning, instead replace it with the terminology community science, because the term citizen science itself is already set up an exclusionary gatekeeping type of framework that makes certain people in our community feel like they're unwelcome, or they don't belong within that space. So just throwing it out there, like, sometimes the wording and how we present things makes a big difference. So maybe trying to hone in towards community science is a good start. But then, of course, tapping in with local organizations. Tech Interactive is a great place to start. If you're in the East Bay, there's the Watershed Project, there's Black Girls Code, there's the Hidden Genius Project out in Oakland. There's a list of them. If you want to know more, tap in with Stephen, Michelle, or myself. I think my email will be shared at the end. But tap into those programs that already have the framework. And that way you're not stuck trying to reinvent the wheel, because they already know how to work with the youth. So it's just a matter of plugging in and seeing how you can adapt it to your own respective institution.
Yeah, one of the things that I do a lot with my kids is I also use like iNaturalist or, like Seek, and just get them used to the idea of science science, and like I do it with my kids actually. So third question, and we can also share resources of that after the talk. So can you talk more about when you could clearly see your life purpose? What was this awakening like? And just as a note, we covered this in when I interviewed Robin for our exhibition. We talked about, I think you should tell that story about your mom and crossing the bridge.
Let me take a sip of this room temperature water.
That is a wonderful story.
So that story, what I'm about to share, it definitely speaks to knowing at a young age what I wanted. And it speaks to like that example of little Jesse at the end, that even at a young age, many of us kind of have an idea of what we want to be, but for some reason, it's not entirely supported for people because of the color of the skin or their gender identity and so forth. But I'm also throwing that as a placeholder because that definitely has informed my life decision, but I'm still learning every day what my life purpose is. So without further ado, the story is a pretty interesting story. My father used to work across the Richmond-born Bridge. And so my mother used to drive him across, and sometimes she would take some of us kids. Full disclosure, I come from a family of 12 siblings. I'm right there in the middle. I think I'm number 6. Yes, I'm number 6. We lose count after a while. But yeah, there's 12 of us siblings, 14 nieces and nephews. We have a huge family, almost as huge as my afro right now. But it would be exciting when a couple of us would be able to go on the bridge or go across. Like that would be the highlight of our day. And I remember one day, probably like in the maybe 3rd or 4th grade, and had asked her, "How is this road above water?" And she said, "I don't know. You should ask a civil engineer." And I was like, "Well, what's a civil engineer?" She said, "I don't know. You're gonna have to look it up." And mind you, we didn't have internet back then, but we did. For some of you younger ones, we have this thing called encyclopedias and Britannicas. They are positioned on these structures called bookshelves. And so I went to the thing called a bookshelf and pulled out an encyclopedia, and I looked it up, 3rd or 4th grade, looking up what a civil engineer is. And I thought like that sounds really cool. And I remember like expressing like, I want to be a civil engineer. Life happened. I went through my, crooked ends and straight ends in between. But as life progressed, I revisited that moment when I was a young adult. And I was like, you know what? I do want to be a civil engineer. It explicitly intersects issues of engineering and social impact when we put in new infrastructure and so forth. But as you heard, I built a bridge for a senior project and it failed. And so I do not want to be putting my name on any bridges. I'm much better with just playing with soil and water.
Anyway, I love that story. We got time for a couple of more questions, I think. So what encouraged you to keep getting back up when you encountered roadblocks?
Mentors. And I cannot express how much or how powerful those mentors have been for me, because they have been there to remind me, even when I refuse to believe in myself, that I do have purpose and I do have value. And we all reach those moments, whether it's in our professional or personal life, where we feel like we're inadequate. But when you have someone in your corner who's reminding you, no, you're more than adequate. You bring so much to the table, and you need to remember that. And like a clear example was when I was in community college, and this was like my last time dropping out of college. I ended up dropping out, but returning because this professor, he just came up to me, he said, "Yo, Robin, like, I seen you haven't been doing well in your 2nd semester physics class. I'm not disappointed, but I am worried because I see so much talent and potential in you, and I don't want it to go to waste." And it was in that moment where I was like, wow, this old white guy cares about me. And that old white guy is, one of my favorite mentors, Dr. Conrad. He's a legend at Contra Costa College. And it's because of that moment, like where I've always told myself, you know what, I'm going to go for that PhD. Dr. Conrad believed in me I should believe in myself as well. And so again, when you get knocked down, that's what I mean when I say you can never have enough mentors, because there'll always be someone ready to step in, pick you back up, even when you feel like it's not time to get up.
Great. Yeah. Believing in yourself is important too. Yeah. How could parents serve as role models and cheerleaders in helping youth to challenge themselves? Can you speak about this based on your own experience?
Mhm. So for me personally, my father doesn't have a high school education. My mother did graduate high school, but really didn't do anything with it after that. So in our household, it was acknowledged that education is important, but didn't really know why. We just knew like having that piece of paper from high school meant something. But my dad was, my dad is, and continues to be one of the hardest workers I know. And so even growing up as a child and working with him, cleaning office buildings in San Francisco and Oakland, like, it instilled in me a lot of sense of knowing what the outcome is of committing ourselves to hard work and committing ourselves to um, this idea of teamwork. If we work efficiently and effectively and communicate with each other, even when we're in disagreement for things in the house, we can get the job done faster and come home. Um, and likewise with my mother, like I've always had someone who I could speak to in confidence about anything that's going on in my life, even to this day. Like I'd mentioned about the suicide death of my best friend, and at that moment, she was the only person I could talk to, the only person who I could express myself to. And so having someone who can champion me emotionally, and both my parents, with again, I acknowledge the privilege to have both parents in my life, having that was huge. And so, the question being, how can parents be champions and advocates for their students or for their children? It starts with asking your child, what do you want to be, and what can I do to help you? Because oftentimes, us adults, even those who aren't parents like myself, um, we think that because we've already gone through the experience, that we know the path, we know the navigational journey that's required. But time changed. Even now, working through a virtual screen to communicate, that's not something people in past generations have had to do. So acknowledging that our way is not always the right way or the best way, and asking the young people in your life, whether you mentor them or they're actually your children, asking them, what can we do to make sure you get to the next step?
Great. That's wonderful. Listening, I think, which is also something that you were talking about, like your mom listened to you when you needed it the most, is it's a big deal. Also, so I'm kind of in two minds because we're coming upon the end of our time together, Robin, and I have two things that I really want you to speak to. One is if you could offer words of advice to our audience. Like I said before, we're pretty diverse. We've got teens in the audience. We've got all kinds of different people at different stages in their lives. If you could offer words of advice, that would be great. And I am dying to also know the Netflix story. So we have, I think, 1 minute left. Is there a way that you can, 30 seconds on words of advice and maybe 30 seconds on the Netflix story?
Yes, words of advice is just like what I said in my closing of the slide deck. To double down on that, it's your story. Do not let other people write the pages for you. Um, that's how you find your voice. That's how you know your identity, when you're the one expressing it. Um, Moving on from that very deep thought and going into something very comical. And maybe this is the best way to close it out. That story with Bill Nye, and this was a hard one to explain to my partner when I came back and had to tell her what happened. But I went down to LA with my brother and my dad to go watch a boxing match at the Forum. And on the way down, I was on Twitter and I seen something Bill Nye posted. There's going to be a free lecture at USC. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So when we touched down in LA, I left my brother and my dad. I said, leave the tickets in the hotel room. I'll find you guys later. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I just said, I got something to do. They just, I think my family has learned just not to question anything I do these days. Sometimes it's best they don't ask. So I went, and when I showed up to the site to check in and all that, you know, I was having small talk with one of the people on the production team. They're like asking where you from, because most of the people who were coming were students from UCLA and USC. And I was like, oh, I'm from the Bay. I just flew in from Oakland. And they're like, oh, what? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, you flew all the way from Oakland to come watch and hear this? I wasn't gonna burst their bubble. And I was like, yeah, I came in from Oakland to watch this. Like, you know, I love Bill Nye. And they're like, you know what? Someone didn't show up who's supposed to be on the Netflix series. Do you want to be on the show? I was like, hell yeah. So to save myself all the embarrassment, because I know curious minds are probably going to go up Netflix and look it up. I think the episode was Superbugs. And in the episode, and this is what I mean when I say it's hard to explain this to my partner. In the episode, Bill Nye gives me gonorrhea. Don't worry, cured me, took me to a researcher at USC, and I was cured of gonorrhea by Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Okay, there not many people can finish a webinar with that kind of story. That is wonderful. It illustrates so much about you and your persistence. So I want to thank you so much, Robin, for joining us for this program, Harnessing Our Untapped Potential. Just wanted to say a couple of kind of calls to action. And if you're interested in you know, organizations for mentorship and building to elevate students, we've got some resources on screen for you: the Tech and the Tech Student Board, the Tech Teen Tech SF, Black Girls Code. Another thing that you can do, call to action, is to follow Robin and to engage with more of his story. Check out Richmond Life, LYFE. So again, just wanted to thank you, Robin. That was a wonderful conversation. I wish it could last longer. Want to thank the audience for joining us, and to encourage everyone in the audience to follow the Tech Interactive. And I want to also thank the supporters of the Tech Interactive for making all of this possible. Again, thank you to the audience, and I want to wish everyone a great day. See you later.